You don't look like someone who belongs in first class." The words dropped like a hammer in the narrow cabin, loud enough for half the rows to hear. The woman in seat 2 amperes didn't whisper. She wanted an audience. Her tone was polished cruelty, the kind that hides behind confidence but drips with contempt. Passengers froze mid-motion, hands paused over carry-ons, earbuds dangling, conversations cut short. And there, standing in the aisle, was Marcus. Tall, steady, nothing extravagant about him. Gray sweater, clean jeans, boarding pass in his hand. His seat, his ticket, his right. But in her eyes, none of that mattered. She tilted her head, smirk curling as if the leather seat itself had been written in her name. "Try economy," she added, louder this time. "That's more your style." The plane seemed to shrink. A ripple of unease ran down the rows. Someone coughed. Someone else raised a phone, pretending to scroll but already recording. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't rush to defend himself. He simply looked at her, then at the boarding pass, then back at her again. The silence he carried wasn't weakness, it was weight. Years of moments like this condensed into a single breath. From behind, a passenger muttered, "Did she really just say that?" Another voice whispered, "He showed his ticket. Why won't they let him sit?" The woman leaned back, adjusting her sunglasses, though the cabin lights were dim. "Don't make this harder. People like you don't pay for this row." Marcus's grip on the pass didn't tighten. His shoulders didn't rise. He stood as if anchored, calm enough to unsettle the storm building around him. And in that calm was the beginning of something much bigger than one seat. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. He lowered the pass slightly toward the steward, lingering 2 rows away. "Scan it again," Marcus said, voice even but edged with steel. The woman scoffed. "Save us the trouble. That ticket's fake, just like the card you probably carry. Every month it's the same scam." Phones lifted higher. Faces turned sharper. A trial was forming in real time, jury drawn from strangers in rows 3 through 10. But Marcus didn't raise his tone. He didn't trade insult for insult. He only stood in the aisle, quiet, composed, an unmoved presence in the center of rising chaos. And that silence? It was the sound of a reckoning waiting to arrive. Marcus Carter had chosen his outfit deliberately. No Rolex, no tailored suit, no entourage trailing behind him. Just a plain sweater, dark jeans, and a single boarding pass tucked into his hand. To anyone else, he looked like a man on a budget flight trying his luck in first class. But nothing about his presence was accidental. Marcus wasn't just another passenger. He was the co-founder of Carter Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with investments spanning energy, tech, and transportation. And Horizon Airlines, the very company operating this flight, was one of his biggest stakes. He owned 25%, enough to shape policies, enough to appoint executives, enough to ground an entire crew with a single call. Today wasn't a business trip, it was an experiment. For months, reports had trickled in about appearance profiling on Horizon flights. Not race on paper, not words written in policy, but the whispers were consistent. Passengers dressed down, especially people of color, were treated as if they didn't belong. Marcus had read the complaints, skimmed the legal briefs, seen the PR statements his own airline issued. But he didn't want reports. He wanted the truth. So he booked seat 2 amperes under his real name. No assistant to smooth the way, no special alert to the staff. He scanned his ticket like everyone else and walked on board alone. And within minutes, the experiment produced results. The accusation, the insult, the laughter rippling down the aisle. Exactly the same tone he'd seen directed at strangers in the stories forwarded to his office. Now, he was living it. He thought back to being 25, fresh out of grad school when he applied for a job at a regional airline. He had shown up in pressed slacks, resume sharp, recommendations lined up. The manager barely glanced at the paper before muttering, "Not the image we're looking for." That rejection became fuel. Every deal, every acquisition, every late night, Marcus carried those words like fire in his chest. And now, decades later, the same energy confronted him again. Here in the cabin of an airline he partially owned. He studied the faces around him. Some passengers leaned away as if his presence was contagious. Others watched in silence, eyes narrowing, deciding whether to believe the woman who had claimed he didn't belong. A few, phones raised, were already documenting what could become tomorrow's headline. Marcus stayed motionless, not because he lacked options, but because patience was his sharpest weapon. The more they pushed, the clearer the truth would become. And that was the point. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about what the seat represented. The constant assumption that wealth and dignity had a look, a uniform, a skin tone. Marcus had dismantled that lie in boardrooms for 2 decades. Today, he was dismantling it at 30,000 feet, one quiet moment at a time. The steward finally stepped forward, a tablet in one hand, authority in the other. His badge read Brian Foster, Horizon Airlines. He scanned Marcus up and down, pausing just long enough to make the judgment obvious. "Sir, you need to clear the aisle," Brian said flatly. "We have premium guests boarding behind you." Marcus extended the boarding pass without a word. Brian glanced at it, then at Marcus's face, then back at the sweater and jeans. His lips twitched into something between doubt and disdain. "This has to be a mistake," Brian muttered, half to himself but loud enough for row 4 to hear. "I've seen this before. Printed at home, maybe." "How will?" From her seat, the woman who'd started it all leaned closer, feeding off the steward's tone. "Told you," she said, her voice rising for the crowd. "First class isn't a lottery ticket. Economy's that way." A ripple of chuckles floated from 2 rows back. Not everyone joined in, some looked away, uncomfortable, but the damage had already been done. Marcus stayed still, boarding pass steady in his hand. Brian tapped his tablet. "There's no record of you in 2 amperes, he said finally. "Either your ticket is invalid, or you're trying to take a seat that doesn't belong to you. I'll need you to step aside." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the beep of another passenger scanning in at the front. A middle-aged man in a navy suit leaned toward his companion and whispered, "This doesn't look right." His companion shook her head, eyes on Marcus. Marcus didn't move. "Run the scan again," he said, calm, deliberate. Brian sicht, feigning patience. "I don't have time for games, sir. If you don't comply, I'll call the lead attendant." The woman in 2 amperes smirked, stretching her legs as though claiming the space even harder. "Better call security while you're at it," she added. "This man's wasting everyone's time." Phones lifted higher now. The glow of screens dotted the cabin like small spotlights, each capturing the moment from a different angle. A young passenger in row 5 muttered into his mic, "Live on TikTok, y'all. You're not gonna believe this." Brian stiffened, noticing the cameras. "Put the phones away," he snapped, but no one moved. Marcus didn't lift his voice. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't exist," he said. Brian ignored him, pulling his radio from his belt. "Captain, we've got a non-compliant passenger in the first-class cabin. Possible fraud." The words hung in the air like a charge before lightning. Marcus stayed where he was, steady, unshaken. His stillness was louder than their accusations. And somewhere in the silence, the story was already being written not by policy, not by the airline, but by every witness watching it unfold in real time. The cabin felt smaller with every word spoken against him. Laughter lingered, whispers spread, the steward's radio still clipped to his shoulder. But Marcus remained exactly where he was, unmoved, unshaken, as if rooted to the aisle itself. He could have argued. He could have shouted. He could have listed titles, holdings, numbers big enough to drown their assumptions. But that wasn't his way. Silence had always been sharper than noise. Brian frowned, impatient. "Sir, do you understand me? I asked you to step aside." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He studied the steward with a measured gaze, calm enough to be mistaken for defiance. He wasn't refusing to comply. He was refusing to surrender dignity. Passengers leaned in, hungry for resolution. A teenage boy near the bulkhead whispered to his mother, "Why isn't he saying anything?" The mother shook her head slowly, eyes locked on Marcus. "Because he doesn't need to." The woman in seat 2 amperes, irritated by the lack of reaction, pushed harder. "What are you waiting for? He doesn't belong here. Just remove him." Her voice cracked a little too loud, a little too desperate, and the shift was subtle but real. Some passengers frowned, realizing the venom was hers, not his. Marcus finally spoke, voice steady, barely above a murmur. "Run the scan again." 4 words. No anger, no pleading, just wait. Brian tapped at his tablet once more, scrolling, hesitating. Still nothing. He looked up, his expression tightening. "Sir, if you continue to ignore instructions, I'll have no choice but to call the captain directly." Marcus said nothing this time. His silence pressed heavier than any protest could. The hum of the overhead vents filled the gap. Someone's ringtone chirped briefly before being silenced. A phone camera adjusted focus, the lens catching every twitch of the steward's jaw. The stillness was deliberate. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. Every second he held his ground without raising his voice was another second, exposing the imbalance. A calm man, accused and cornered, versus a system unraveling in real time. The woman in 2 amperes scoffed, her smugness faltering. See, he won't even defend himself. That's all the proof you need. But passengers weren't convinced. One man muttered from row 6. Proof of what? He has a ticket. Another replied, yeah, and he hasn't even raised his voice. Marcus inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. Years of boardrooms, hostile negotiations, dismissive stares, all of it had trained him for this kind of silence. He didn't need to dominate the room. He just needed to outlast their prejudice until it collapsed under its own weight. And in that moment, it was clear. He wasn't resisting removal. He was resisting erasure. A red light blinked quietly in row 5. A passenger, early 30s, hoodie pulled up, phone angled low, was already filming. His lens caught the boarding pass in Marcus's hand, the steward's tightening jaw, the woman in 2 amperes leaning back like royalty. Streaming this, he whispered into his mic. People need to see it. 2 rows up, a middle-aged woman with a silver carry-on shook her head. She leaned toward her seatmate and muttered, he hasn't done a thing. They're making a spectacle out of nothing. Her seatmate raised his brows, already pulling his phone from his pocket. The glow spread screens lifting one by one, tiny witnesses gathering evidence. The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was humming, attention alive in every row. Marcus didn't move. His silence was still the center of gravity, but now the orbit around him was shifting. Then a young voice cut through. Row 4, aisle seat, a girl no older than 20, traveling alone, backpack hugged to her chest. She rose halfway, her voice shaking but clear enough to travel. Excuse me, she said, eyes flicking between Marcus and the steward. I saw his ticket scan green at the gate. I was right behind him. It beeped valid. He belongs here. The words landed heavier than anyone expected. The steward froze. The woman in 2 amperes turned sharply, glare sharp enough to cut. Stay out of this, she snapped. But it was too late. The air had shifted again. Other passengers straightened in their seats. Someone whispered, Did you hear that? She saw it scan. Another replied, Then why are they saying it's fake? The girl's voice trembled, but she didn't sit back down. You can't just erase someone because you don't like how they look. His ticket's real. The steward's jaw flexed. Miss, please remain seated. This doesn't concern you. But it did. Everyone knew it did. Marcus finally turned his head, meeting the girl's eyes. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but the acknowledgement was there, steady, grateful, silent. The woman in 2 amperes huffed, louder this time, desperate to reclaim the narrative. People like him fake tickets all the time. Don't be fooled. The girl shook her head, her voice stronger now. No, I saw it, and I won't lie for you. Murmurs grew into open voices. She's right. This isn't right. Why are they treating him like this? The cameras kept rolling, capturing not just a man under suspicion, but a community beginning to awaken. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus wasn't standing alone. The silence he carried had become contagious, spreading into courage for others to speak. The tide was turning, one witness at a time. The steward's radio crackled, then a deeper voice filled the air. What's the holdup in first class? Moments later, a tall man in a crisp Navy uniform appeared from the cockpit door. Captain Daniel Pierce, authority stitched across his shoulders, walked down the aisle with heavy steps that seemed to echo louder than the cabin hum. Passengers quieted instantly. Cameras stayed raised. Sir, Daniel said, voice clipped, you're obstructing boarding. This seat isn't yours. You'll need to move now. Marcus extended the boarding pass once again. Calm, unwavering. Daniel barely looked at it. I've flown 20 years. I know when someone's trying to bluff their way into a cabin they don't belong in. His eyes scanned Marcus's sweater, his jeans, his simple watch. First class has a standard. You don't meet it. Gasps rippled through the rows. A few passengers muttered curses under their breath. One man whispered to his wife, Did he just say that out loud? The young witness from row 4 shot to her feet again. I told you I saw his ticket scan valid? Daniel's gaze snapped toward her. Sit down, miss. or you'll be removed as well." The threat hung in the air like smoke. The girl sank back reluctantly, but her defiance lingered. Phones caught every second, lenses trembling with indignation. From seat 2 amperes, the woman smirked, emboldened by the captain's presence. "See? Even he knows. This man doesn't belong here." Daniel didn't contradict her. Instead, he turned to Brian, the steward. "Call ground security. We'll have him escorted before takeoff." The words landed like a gavel. Passengers erupted in whispers, some outraged, others stunned into silence. A man in business attire muttered, "This is insane, he has a ticket." His seatmate shook her head. "Doesn't matter. They've already decided." Marcus remained steady, voice low but cutting. "You're making a serious mistake." Daniel's jaw tightened. "The only mistake here is wasting time on you. You can leave quietly, or we'll make it official." It wasn't just a refusal of service anymore. It was humiliation, carried out under the authority of the uniform, in front of dozens of witnesses. The cameras captured every syllable. The internet would see what this cabin had just heard. A captain equating appearance with legitimacy, turning prejudice into policy. And still, Marcus didn't raise his voice. His stillness filled the aisle with something heavier than outraged certainty, because the storm they thought they controlled was already slipping from their hands. Brian's patience snapped first. With a sharp motion, he snatched the boarding pass from Marcus's hand. Gasps erupted. Cameras zoomed in. Before Marcus could respond, Brian tore the ticket clean down the middle, the rip of paper echoing louder than the hum of the engines. He let the pieces flutter to the floor like discarded trash. "There," he said coldly. "Problem solved." The woman in seat 2 amperes clapped once, mocking applause. "About time." Marcus didn't move. He looked at the torn paper on the carpet, then slowly lifted his gaze back to Brian. His silence was heavier than any protest. The young witness in row 4 shouted, her voice cracking, "You can't do that. That was proof his ticket was real." Daniel, the captain, raised a hand to shut her down. "Enough. One more outburst and you're off this flight too." Then he turned back to Marcus, jaw hard. "Sir, you're done here. You either leave voluntarily, or we'll have airport police waiting at the gate." Passengers stirred, some horrified, others muttering disbelief. A man in a blazer leaned toward his phone, whispering into a live stream, "They just tore up his boarding pass. This is insane. He's not even resisting." Marcus finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate. Each syllable weighted. "You just destroyed federal property, and you think that proves anything?" Brian scoffed, stepping closer. "It proves you don't belong here. Now move." His hand shot forward, brushing against Marcus's shoulder in a shove disguised as procedure. Gasps again. Phones shook as passengers tried to capture every angle. Marcus didn't stumble. He stood rooted, eyes fixed on Brian. "Touch me again," he said softly, "and you'll answer for it in more ways than one." But Brian was already calling into his radio. "Dispatch, we need ground security on standby. Passenger refusing orders. Possible fraud. Possible threat." The words "possible threat" hit the cabin like a thunderclap. A mother in row 6 pulled her child closer. Another passenger muttered, "He hasn't even raised his voice." Marcus stayed calm, hands visible at his sides, posture composed. He wasn't just enduring humiliation, he was absorbing it. Every false word, every unjust act, storing it like evidence. The captain gave a final order, "Escort him out when security arrives. This cabin will not be delayed for him." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Phones were still up, eyes were still wide, and at the center of it all stood Marcus, anchored, silent, carrying himself with a patience that didn't look like surrender. It looked like strategy, because the more they tried to erase him, the more the world watching would remember. Marcus reached calmly into his pocket, not fast, not defensive, but deliberate. Every camera caught the motion. He pulled out a sleek black phone, tapped once, and raised it to his ear. "Connect me to Valerie," he said, voice steady. On the other end, a clear female voice answered almost instantly, "Yes, Mr. Carter, we've been monitoring. Do you want protocol initiated?" The cabin shifted. Passengers blinked at one another. Mr. Carter. The name landed differently now. Marcus's eyes never left the captain. "Yes, begin documentation. Log everything from the first confrontation. Timestamp every word." Valerie's tone sharpened. Professional. "Confirmed. Video sync active. Crew actions being recorded in real time." Brian frowned. his confidence faltering for the first time. "What? What are you doing?" Marcus lowered the phone slightly, but his voice carried enough for half the cabin to hear. "Securing evidence. This isn't about one seat anymore. This is about accountability." And the young witness from row 4 leaned forward, her eyes wide. "He's recording them," she whispered, her phone still streaming. The captain tried to reassert control. "Sir, that won't change the fact you're not authorized to be here." Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "Run the scan again, or keep digging the hole deeper. Your choice." Valerie's voice returned through the phone, crisp. "System cross-check complete. Passenger, Marcus Carter, seat 2 amperes. Verified. First class elite. Do you want escalation to the board?" Gasps rippled through the rows. The name clicked for several passengers at once. One man muttered, "Wait, Marcus Carter? As in Carter Holdings?" Another replied, "No way. That's him?" Marcus didn't confirm. Not yet. He simply said, "Hold escalation. Give them one more chance to correct themselves." The steward's mouth opened, then shut again. His bravado didn't sound so convincing under the weight of those words. The woman in 2 amperes tried to laugh it off, though it rang hollow. "Oh, please, you expect us to believe you're somebody important dressed like that?" Marcus finally turned, just enough to let the cameras catch his profile. "You expect clothing to tell you who belongs. That's your mistake." Every syllable was clear, measured, designed to outlast denial. Phones kept recording. The live stream counter ticked higher, and with every passing second, the balance of power shifted further away from the crew and closer to the man they had tried to erase. Because Marcus wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was building the case that would dismantle them. The cabin held its breath, waiting. Every phone was raised now. Dozens of lenses pointed at the man in the aisle. For the first time, Marcus shifted his stance, not in retreat, but in declaration. He spoke calmly, but his words cut sharper than any shout. "My name is Marcus Carter. I own 25% of this airline." The silence that followed was electric. A second stretched into eternity. Then gasps erupted like sparks. One passenger muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered louder, "He's the Carter, the boardroom guy." The young witness in row 4 clasped her hands to her mouth. "I knew it," she whispered. Brian, the steward who had torn the ticket, blinked rapidly, as though the name itself had ripped through his certainty. The captain's posture stiffened, his authority cracking in plain view. Marcus didn't stop. He let the weight of his identity settle into the room, then layered it with precision. "The seat you tried to deny me is mine. The ticket you destroyed was purchased through my account, and the airline you represent answers directly to me." The woman in 2 amperes froze. Her smirk faltered, lips parting as if to argue, but no words came out. She sank back into the seat, eyes darting toward the phones, capturing every second. A ripple of murmurs swept the cabin. A businessman near the window said into his live stream, "They just tried to throw out the man who owns part of the company." Comments poured across his screen in real time. "Unbelievable. Lawsuit incoming." "They're done." The captain attempted to salvage ground, though his voice wavered. "Even if you are who you claim to be, procedure." Marcus cut him off with a single glance. "Procedure does not include tearing valid tickets, putting hands on passengers, or calling them threats because of how they dress. That's not policy. That's prejudice." Every phone caught it. Every witness heard it. The silence after those words wasn't emptiness, it was collapse. The facade of control shattered. Marcus raised his phone again. "Valerie, escalate to the board. Notify them of a direct breach involving crew misconduct, effective immediately." Valerie's voice came clear, unwavering. "Understood. Escalation live. All actions time-stamped. Board members are receiving feed now." Passengers exchanged looks of awe and disbelief. What began as humiliation had transformed into revelation, and now into judgment. Judgment not against Marcus, but against those who had stood against him. He lowered the phone slowly, eyes sweeping the cabin. "You thought silence was submission. It wasn't. It was patience. And now it's over." The words settled like a verdict, and everyone knew the trial had already ended. The reaction was instant, like a pressure valve bursting. Brian's face drained of color, the steward suddenly small behind his uniform. He glanced down at the shredded ticket on the carpet, then back at Marcus, realizing the cameras had caught every flick of his hand. His lips parted, but no excuse could crawl out. Captain Pierce stiffened, his authority unraveling in real time. The same voice that moments ago threatened police now faltered. He tugged at his collar, eyes flicking nervously toward the recording phones. His authority had always rested on command and control. Now it crumbled under exposure. And the woman in 2 amperes, her smirk gone, her sunglasses sliding down the bridge of her nose, looked cornered. She tried to laugh, a thin sound that didn't carry. I didn't know, she stammered, voice cracking. I thought, but the sentence never finished. The cabin erupted with murmurs, no longer whispers, but open condemnation. He's the owner? One passenger said, incredulous. They tried to throw him out of his own airline, another added. Unbelievable. This is history right here, a third whispered, their phones streaming live to thousands. Applause broke suddenly from row 6, a lone pair of hands clapping, then joined by another, then more. It wasn't thunderous, not yet, but it grew, a ripple of solidarity spreading through the cabin. Cameras panned, capturing the transformation of a crowd from silent observers to vocal witnesses. The young woman from row 4 stood again, braver now. I told you, she said, voice ringing. His ticket was valid. You didn't listen, and you tried to erase him. All eyes turned to her, then back to Marcus, standing calm, steady in the aisle. Brian tried to mumble something about policy, but the words dissolved under the weight of the moment. The captain muttered about miscommunication, but even he knew it was hollow. The passengers weren't buying it. The internet wouldn't either. The woman in 2 amperes folded her arms tightly, shrinking into the seat she had once occupied with arrogance. Her eyes darted away from the phones, but there was nowhere left to hide. Every witness knew. The hierarchy had flipped. Marcus hadn't raised his voice once, and yet every ounce of power in the cabin now belonged to him. The applause grew louder, steady now, until the very air vibrated with approval. Passengers who had stayed silent before now leaned into the lens of their own cameras, speaking directly. We saw what happened. He was calm. They were wrong. It was no longer just Marcus against them. It was Marcus, and everyone who dared to see the truth, against a system caught in its own prejudice. And for the crew, there was no undoing what had just been revealed. The trial was over. The verdict delivered. The world was watching. The applause faded into a tense hush, anticipation thick in the recycled cabin air. Dozens of eyes fixed on Marcus, waiting to see what came next. He lifted his phone again, calm, deliberate. Valerie, he said, his voice carrying across the rows. Initiate removal protocol. Effective immediately. Her reply came crisp and certain, audible even through the speaker. Confirmed. Which crew members? Marcus's gaze didn't waver. He looked first at Brian, still frozen near the shredded ticket. Brian Foster, flight steward. Then his eyes cut to the captain, Daniel Pierce, captain of this flight. And finally, to the woman in 2 amperes, still sinking into her seat. Passenger misconduct logged. Forward her details for legal follow-up. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Phones lifted higher. The live stream counters spiked. Valerie's voice came steady as steel. Processing now. Crew access is being revoked. Brian's badge beeped suddenly, one sharp tone, then a red light blinking. His tablet went dark in his hands. He tapped the screen in panic, but nothing responded. Wait, no, that's not possible. The captain's radio crackled uselessly, then fell silent. His access to command codes locked out, just like that. He gripped it tighter, face pale, realizing his authority had been severed mid-flight. Gasps and whispers rippled through the cabin. He just shut them down. Liv, right in front of us. The woman in 2 amperes tried to laugh again, but her voice trembled. He can't actually, but her words drowned under the sound of another passenger saying firmly, he just did. Marcus lowered the phone, his expression calm but absolute. Your access has been terminated. You will not represent this airline again. Every action you took today has been logged and sent to the board. The evidence is irrefutable. Brian stammered. I was just following protocol. Marcus's eyes cut through him. No, you were following prejudice, and that has no place in the skies we own. The applause returned, louder this time, echoing down the narrow cabin like thunder. Passengers leaned forward, clapping, cheering, some even shouting, yes. The live stream comments exploded. Justice served. This is unreal. He handled it without yelling once. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't revel. He simply stood anchored, letting the moment speak louder than any triumph could. The crew who had tried to erase him now stood erased themselves, badges dead, authority revoked, reputations collapsing in real time. And for everyone watching, inside the plane and beyond the screens, the message was undeniable. Power could be quiet, but it was never weak. The cabin had shifted. The air that once carried suspicion now buzzed with vindication. Phones stayed raised, but not to capture humiliation anymore. They were documenting justice in real time. Brian slumped against the galley wall, his dead badge blinking red like a scarlet mark. Captain Pierce sat rigid in his chair, the weight of silence heavier than any command he'd ever given. And the woman in 2 amperes, once so loud, now stared out the window, hoping the glass could shield her from the truth. Marcus remained standing, steady in the aisle. He didn't revel in their collapse. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. He lifted his voice just once more, every syllable measured and deliberate. You thought my clothes decided my worth. You thought silence meant weakness. And you thought power had to shout to be real. He let the pause hang, every eye locked on him. But dignity doesn't beg. It doesn't bargain. It waits. And when it speaks, it ends the lie. The cabin fell utterly still. Then, slowly, applause rose again, this time unanimous. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Passengers clapped, some whistled, others shouted words of encouragement. The young witness in row 4 had tears brimming in her eyes, phone still recording as she whispered, "That's how you do it." Marcus lowered his phone at last, ending the call with Valerie. Evidence secured, crew access revoked, justice complete. He reached down, gathered the shredded pieces of his boarding pass, and handed them to a nearby passenger still filming. "Keep this," he said softly. "Proof that silence isn't surrender." "Ugh." The passenger nodded, clutching the torn paper like something historic. Marcus finally turned toward his seat 2 amperes, the very seat they had tried to deny him. He sat with quiet authority, adjusting his sweater, eyes calm. The storm was over, but the lesson remained. The live stream counters ticked into the hundreds of thousands. Headlines were already writing themselves in the hands of passengers pressing upload. The world outside this cabin would know what happened here today. Marcus leaned back, his final words carrying through the cabin like a verdict. "I don't need the video, I am the result it proves." And with that, the trial ended not in court, but in the air, where prejudice had been dismantled by patience, and silence had spoken louder than hate ever could.